Testing, 1, 2, 3. Welcome, everybody. Hello. I think we have quorum. We do. And it's a little bit late. I thank everybody that's here today to the Built Heritage Committee. I'm wondering if anyone does want to speak and you haven't signed one of these forms yet. They are available at our version of Vanna over to my right. And so please take the time to go over and do that now. But I'm going to ask for a brief presentation on both of these items, and just give us the genesis of it. And we have received several submissions just in the last 24 hours. So I'm going to do some technical stuff first. Okay, so good morning. To those members on the committee, does anyone have a declaration of interest? Thank you. I'm looking right at Barry, because as interested as we are, we wouldn't have a problem with it. Confirmation of minutes, the minutes of minutes 9 from 14th of November. Carrie? Okay, so our first application is the application for new construction on Birch Avenue. Properties designated on Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. And we do have speakers on that, and I am going to ask for a bit of a presentation, so we'll hold that one. On the second one, the application for demolition and new construction at 215 McLeod Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have had some communication, but we don't have any speakers. Does anyone on the committee desire to hold that, or can that be carried? Item number 2. Carrie? Carried? Sure. Thank you. Okay. So we will go back to item number 1 and have a brief presentation, and then have our discussion and go to anyone wanting to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This is an application for new construction on Birch Avenue in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. I just have a very brief presentation for you this morning that sort of gives you some context of the property and the proposed development. The property is located at the very edge of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Birch Avenue is the boundary, so this side of Birch Avenue, so the west side of Birch Avenue, is included in the Heritage Conservation District. This side of Birch Avenue is Manor Park, so Rockcliffe, Manor Park. These lots is 5 building lots that were subdivided in the early 1980s as part of a subdivision that included all of this area here. It was called Rockcliffe on the Lake. The lots were purchased by the Iraqi government at the time of subdivision and have just never been built on. Excuse me. As you are aware, or likely aware, a couple of years ago there was an application to construct a new ambassador's residence on another property owned by the government of the Republic of Iraq on Lansdowne Road, also in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. That application for demolition and new construction was refused by City Council, so now the government of Iraq is back with a new application on these 5 vacant lots still located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage District. So as you can see, the current condition of the property is that it's heavily treed because it has never been built on. Right here we're at the corner of Pond Street and Birch Avenue. Here we're looking north along Birch at the corner of Eastbourne and Birch. This is on the other side of the property, so on the McNabb Street side, and also on the Pond Street side. So you can see it's very heavily treed property at the moment. This is something that we took into account when assessing the application. So the proposed building for the site is an ambassador's residence. It's sort of made up of 3 kind of pavilions. The front piece here is the formal sort of entrance pavilion that will have the formal functions of the ambassador's residence. The piece at the rear will be the actual residential home of the ambassador and his family. And then this piece over here is a swimming pool, and it's an indoor swimming pool. From a site plan perspective, there would be a circular drive for drop-off of guests and officials, as well as a driveway that's going down to the back of the property to a garage that is underground. So this will be a depressed driveway as it goes to the rear of the property. The property has a natural sort of slope that goes from a high point on Birch Avenue, sort of sloping down towards McNabb and Pond. The house is fairly large, approximately 1,500 square meters. However, it is built over these 5 building lots, so it complies with all the zoning provisions where five houses would be permitted. We've got 1, but it is larger. This is the front elevation facing onto Birch. There is a formal entrance with a porte cochere. You'll see the front portion of the building is 1 story, and the rear portion that I mentioned earlier as the main residential portion is 2 stories, and then this swimming pool pavilion is also 1 story, sorry. This is the north elevation. This shows you the section of the way the driveway will work going into the garage. So as I said, the driveway is depressed, so there would be a retaining wall. These small fences and things you see throughout the drawings illustrate the various terraces and entertaining and leisure spaces that are outside of the building. And this is the south elevation, so the other side. So you can see here this is the porte cochere, that would be the formal entrance. And then this is the rear of the building. This is just a rendering just to show you sort of how the front of the building might work. I'm just going to flip back for 1 second to the site plan. There is a fence proposed for the perimeter of the property. You can see the sort of detail of it here. It would be a metal fence with a sort of palm tree detail at the top. And this will also include gates to restrict vehicular access to the property for security reasons. The fence is proposed to be 1.5 meters high, which is fairly reasonable height of a fence around the property. And I'm now going to talk about the landscape, which is the primary thing that we're very concerned about on this property, as I mentioned earlier. This is the landscape plan. There was, because the property is heavily vegetated now, there was a real effort to maintain that to the greatest extent possible. So at this point, the only trees that are being proposed for removal from the property are those that are where the house is. So those trees would be removed. There is also a planting proposed to replace the trees that would be lost. So as you can see, the main sort of perimeter of the property will retain a very vegetated state, all of the existing trees remaining. Given that the existing vegetation is mainly deciduous, there has been a proposal by the landscape architect to introduce some evergreen trees into the mix to help provide that year-round cover. Because right now, if you were to go there today, with all the leaves off the trees, it's a pretty open site. So there's a proposal to introduce some additional planting of a non-deciduous type. In addition, because of the fence, one of the things that we requested of the applicant to mitigate the impact of the fence is some planting around the fence line to screen the fence from the street, because while it is, necessary as a security requirement for the ambassador, it is also not completely typical of this section of Rockcliffe Park. So trying to work with the security requirements, but also recognizing that the guidelines for Rockcliffe Park talk about the dominance of soft landscape over hard. And so there was a real effort to do that here. So that's the end of my slides. Basically, the department is recommending approval of the application based on the fact that it does meet the guidelines for new construction in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. The Rockcliffe Park Residents Association Development Review Subcommittee did review the application on 2 occasions and provided comments that were incorporated by the applicant into the design. Heritage Ottawa was also circulated the proposal for review and comment, and I believe you have received some correspondence from Heritage Ottawa on this. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you. And one of the comments we had was that Manor Park was not included. Are they not on the city's outreach list of BIAs, community associations, et cetera?
I will admit that that was an error on the department's part to not circulate the Manor Park Community Association. The neighbors within 30 meters of the property were circulated, and in fact we went a bit farther than 30 meters because this was 5 lots. So I did a sort of a broader range.
And 30 meters in Rockcliffe is nothing.
Well, and that's why when we do it in Rockcliffe, we sort of assess it. We go through them afterwards because sometimes you get like 4 people. So, but Manor Park Community Association was not circulated, and that was an oversight on our part.
Okay, and yet we have this before us today because we have to deal with our 90-day rule, and there is a bright side for the people who we've just heard from in the last 24 hours, well, even more recently than that, that are saying, you know, quelle surprise, I didn't know anything about this, and that is the fact that this is going to go, if it's approved or not, to the Planning Committee on January 14th. So that's an opportunity for anyone who wasn't aware and able to change their schedule to come out today if they have comments to make. But and then not to council until the 22nd of January. So thank you. Questions? Vice Chair Podolsky?
Leslie, you went through a description of the landscape mitigation measures. Could you describe a little more explicitly what is being planted to complement or screen the perimeter fencing? Just tell us exactly what the landscape architect is intending. And the other thing is that we all see that there is some new planting along Birch Avenue. Could you describe what each of those things are so that we understand it?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, I just need 1 second to look at the tiny writing on the landscape plan. Give me 1 second, please. Sorry about that. So the planting that's proposed along Birch Avenue here would be deciduous planting. These trees here that you see with the lines across them are proposed coniferous trees. And then the planting that will occur along the perimeter of the fence, particularly along Birch that we've asked for, the species themselves have not yet been determined, but they'll be sort of screening shrubs, that kind of thing. And the applicant may be better able to speak to the specifics of that. That's something that can be determined as the process continues.
Just what we see is 5 round circles along Birch Avenue between the 2 driveways. Are those trees, or are they bushes, or the shrubs? What are they?
Those, as I said, were proposed deciduous trees. Yeah.
Anyone else? We do have 2 speakers that have registered. Steve Rogers. Steve, are you here? Thank you. Come on forward. Welcome. Right in that chair, and they could just press the button and pull the mic right up to you.
Thank you. My name is Steve Rogers. I live at 47 Birch Avenue, directly across from the proposed development, and I'm here representing a group of concerned community members and neighbors, and we very quickly come to an initial and unanimous opposition to this application for a number of reasons, which I'll get into in a moment. And contrary to what's been presented here, I think our view today is that it does not comply with the guidelines as we understand them of the heritage guidelines that were outlined in the impact statement that's part of the application. So, the first objection is the actual design of the building in size and form, which I believe are the terms in the guidelines. It's of a size and a design that is in no way consistent with the character of the neighborhood. I have lived in the neighborhood for many, many years, and I can think of no structure even remotely resembling what's been presented. And so, there are lots of very strong feelings around the design. And in the email that's been sent and distributed to the committee members, we've indicated which specific guidelines we feel that they're in contradiction with. The second point is the orientation of the building onto Birch Avenue. We find that a very odd and misunderstood design element. We feel that it's, if there is something to go there, that it's better oriented onto the Pond and Lakeview Street streets, as they're quieter and more conducive to overflow parking and less disruption to traffic, and also the impact of a large structure like that is impacting far fewer homeowners than it is in its current orientation towards Birch Avenue. Another element that has raised a number of questions is that and I think it was addressed in the earlier presentation, is that the security elements around this proposed development I don't think have been fully fleshed out, and I think you're probably subject to a lot of scope creep here. I guess we're all having a hard time understanding how a 4-foot fence is going to meet the security requirements of a high-profile residence like the Iraqi ambassador's home. So, we don't know what those requirements are, but I think there's probably more research to do on that to truly understand what's going to be required. The old residence on Lansdowne has a very significant fence that is far higher and than 4 feet, and in no way is something that's been represented in the current application. Also, excuse me, on the security front, there will be a significant amount of traffic from the special constable units, especially at a high-profile place like the Iraqi ambassador's home, and that means the squad cars will be there on a regular basis and a prolonged basis, as they are at other high-profile ambassadorial residences, and that means they're going to be parked often on Birch Avenue, which is not really an ideal situation given the bus traffic, the bike traffic, the car traffic. It's just not the ideal frontage for a facility like this. This brings me to my last point. I think the biggest concern is that the Manor Park community has not been informed. Yes, we did receive notification, but that came, I believe, last Friday late, and most people didn't even get their heads around what was happening here until the weekend, and it's really in the last 24 hours that we've been able to get an initial understanding of what's been presented. So I think our request to the group is that, as much as we firmly believe that this does not comply with the guidelines, we're not asking for an outright rejection at this point. I think we're asking for a deferral of this to buy us some more time to understand what's truly being proposed, where we are in this process, and what we can do to participate in the discussion around what actually should go there, and get the input of all the neighbors. The group that I'm representing today is growing. People are still in the process of digesting what's been put in front of them.
Thank you. I think that you've expressed the most common threads of all of the communication that we have received, and have quickly taken the time to read in some cases. I'm just wondering, when did you send out the letters to some of the neighbors? Because it seems to, and how many of those were there? I mean, as you know, you live there, the properties are a lot larger, and that's why they've done more outreach. So I want to start with how many of those went out?
There were 27 letters sent to neighbors both on the Birch Avenue side and on the McNabb Pond Lakeview side of the property. So it's 27 letters in total, which is actually just on, from my previous experience of Rockcliffe Park, is actually a pretty high number. Normally we probably send about 10 to 12 for a property, for an application like this.
Well, and when did you send them out?
They went in the mail on December the 2nd.
Okay, because my interest in asking, I mean, is simply that I don't understand why those people weren't motivated to talk to their other neighbors, if 27 of them went out, ahead of time and start that discussion then. I would think that in my extensive experience with planning, the instant that somebody receives something that they don't think that they're going to like or even, you know, accept, that's when the motivation starts to grow, if you will, for people to get together. So I'm going to ask, I just needed to understand that piece of it. And it doesn't play into what you're talking about, but it does for my information. I just would need to understand that. So I'm going to ask staff to talk to the comments that you made about the heritage guidelines that you feel have not been met. And I want to reiterate what I said earlier about the Planning Committee and the role that it will play. Some of the things that you have brought forward are ones that can be addressed at the Planning Committee, but they would not be ones that would be addressed at a Heritage Committee. And so fortunately, we have that time. What we don't have in order to make comments is the time beyond the 90 days since the application. And one of you, would you care to describe that so that everyone in the room has the same understanding of those timelines that really restrict us or cause us to consider this while we have an opportunity to have input?
I can explain the process, and I spoke with Mr. Rogers about this yesterday. The city is obligated, after the receipt of an application under the Heritage Act, to have it to City Council for a decision one way or the other within 90 days. If there's no decision rendered by City Council within 90 days, it's deemed to be approved. So the 90-day timeline on this application expires on February the 11th, which unfortunately I was slightly incorrect when I spoke with Mr. Rogers yesterday afternoon, means that it cannot get deferred to January meeting of Built Heritage Subcommittee because of the January meeting was moved to the 16th of January. We won't get it there in time. We won't get it to council in time. So it has to continue on the path that it's on. But of course, as you've mentioned, Madam Chair, the Planning Committee can also hear public comments on the issue.
Yeah. So on all of the issues, I know that we've got a staff here taking notes. I want to have those addressed for you before at the Planning Committee. We'll have that information, okay, that you have been raised that aren't part of what we consider at Built Heritage, but certainly would be part of what we could consider at Planning Committee. And Councillor Hobbs and I actually sit on Planning Committee as well. Councillor Moffat?
Thank you. I wanted to ask you to elaborate on one thing, and I'll just I'll tell you why. Just you're talking about the design, and you don't like the look of the building, and I'm just thinking the two buildings on McNabb that are south of it are two large black weird things that are more or less, you know, glorified tree forts, but they're 40 and 50 McNabb Street. They're the two southern properties to it. North of it, 34 Birch is sort of a sharp-looking, you know, wood facade building with a lot of different levels and shapes. And I know it's strange, they have a weird thing up front with the gas meter inside. I used to read your gas meter, so it's a job I used to do in that area. Right north of that one, the next one up from that, which I think is 32 Birch, is a brand new building, which is a brand new home. It's modern looking, but it does have a stone facade. But just given that you have these 4 different properties in a row, this is going to be right in the middle of it. They all have different looks. You know, what's so different about the design of this one when those other 4 don't necessarily fit the community either?
I guess I would strongly disagree with you holding those particular homes up as examples of homes that don't fit into the community. I think they actually fit in very nicely. There's no mistaking those homes that you've mentioned as residential, unique designs, albeit, but residential facilities or buildings that fit into the community from a size and design perspective.
But they're certainly different than your set of birds.
That's fine. For being blunt, the major objection is that the proposed building here looks very industrial, very commercial, and if you wouldn't mind putting up that architectural rendering, that to me and to many, and the unanimous opposition to this is that it is industrial and commercial looking. It looks like the front of a Holiday Inn Express or a strip mall. Okay, it in no way can be anything like this can be found in Rockcliffe or Manor Park. And the houses that you've described are very much houses, whether you think they're a tree house or a, whatever. They are residential homes of an appropriate size and design that's consistent with the neighborhood.
I just wanted
this particular drawing is in conflict with the landscape drawing, in that there are no shrubs represented. This is that street where that white car is Birch Avenue.
I don't think that's accurate.
That white car is sitting right in front of my house.
Sorry, that isn't...
Actually, it is.
Is it?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's an architectural rendering.
You don't have the deciduous trees and things...
That's right. So the landscape plan has been updated since this rendering was done. I simply included it just for illustrative purposes, but this is not part of what the applicant would be tied to in terms of plans.
Because that doesn't look... If you go back... Now go to the map where you have the site plan. Yeah. You see, the distance is greater than what's shown in that... picture.
And that's because, as part of the process, the building was pushed back from the street from that rendering. So the rendering I just put in for the architecture purposes, not for the landscape, and maybe I shouldn't have included it, but I didn't have an updated one.
Well, that's why it's confusing. So how far back is the front door? I mean, I was listening to, in all of Rockcliffe, there isn't another, it's not a carport, it's a...
Porte cochere.
Yeah.
So it's an overhang.
There are lots of them, aren't there?
The applicant has just given me the information they asked for, 50 feet from the front, from the property line.
Which 50 feet is a lot farther than what...
And what's shown, yeah.
You're seeing in that picture with the car in front of your house.
Again, it goes to the point, we are looking at this, we have the information that we have, and we're basing our opposition based on a very limited exposure to what's been proposed and what's been discussed, what's contradictory and what's conflicting between the various images and drawings that we've seen. We just haven't had an opportunity to really understand, and that's part of our concern. Is we want to be involved, we want to understand. Part of it is us to learn the details and have an opportunity to ask the questions and get responses so that we can be part of the solution. We feel with the timelines that are in front of us right now, this is being rammed down our throats and we don't have an opportunity to participate. Now, I'm understanding that there's some sort of timeline that this committee has to, and the city has to adhere to in order to process this through the various committees and get final approval. Our objective today is to try and buy some time within that time frame.
Well, you do have
Again-
time. You do have time because, quite frankly, because of Christmas. You've got more time than normally we would have. But make no mistake, the timing as far as the notification goes and that, there are rules that apply to all, whether it's built heritage, whether it's planning, whether it's Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, that the staff must live by, and we do. And they make sure that the notification goes up on the website, that the notification goes up in a timely fashion. And where you live, I can't understand why you wouldn't have received notification as one of the mail-out people.
Well, I did get notification, but we got the mail on Friday of last week.
Wow, no Canada Post taken, there you go. Ties into today's story, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well,
Because if you mailed it on December the 2nd, it's...
I think the relevant date is when I received it, not when I
Exactly.
sent.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. We have other questions. Catherine, to staff? To staff. So thank you very much for coming forward. And we do have another speaker, and we've got questions of staff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just in regards to Mr. Rogers' comments on the fencing, I know we won't get into what the security is for this property, but because the fence is the height it is that part of what your requirement was, or if they came back for a higher fence, would that be allowed?
Through you, Madam Chair, we would not recommend approval of any higher fence than this. That was one of my primary concerns in looking at this application. I did not want to see, the department did not want to see what is on Lansdowne Road right now, which is, like a 10 or 11-foot fence. So, because it's not in keeping with the character of Rockcliffe.
Okay, perfect. And in terms of, the delegate also mentioned repositioning this property so that the exits are, or repositioning the building so the exit is onto Pond. Was that a consideration at all, or?
The applicant may be better able to elaborate on that question, but my feeling is that if the building were to be reoriented, there would be a number of minor variances that would be required for setback and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but I think that the reason that it was done this way is that it's the way that the building that they wanted to build fit the best on the lot.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. The architect has put his name forward, but for questions only. Yes, I know. Ms. Maitland's going to speak as well. Vice Chair Podolsky?
Just a few other questions to help set the framework of what the Built Heritage Committee is being asked to recommend, and that is, does the current proposal comply with the zoning in terms of setbacks, heights, density?
Yes, there are no minor variances required. It complies in all manners. So if this wasn't in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage District, this would be a building permit only.
Okay. Second question is, and I know the answer, but I think it should be just voiced around the committee, is there site plan control approval required for this property?
No, there isn't, because it's a residential single-family house.
Okay. And consequently, because site plan control approval is not required, there's no need to do any transportation impact study.
That is correct. One additional thing that is required of the applicant is they have to lift a 30-centimeter reserve along Birch Avenue, but I checked into this morning, and there's no traffic circulation as a result of that either. So it is a single-family house, and I know that traffic concerns have been raised. My opinion would be that there would be more traffic resulting from 5 individual homes built on 5 lots than there would be from one house built on 5 lots.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. So our next speaker is Trevor Milne. Trevor, please come forward. To be followed by Leslie Maitland. Welcome.
Perfect. Thank you very much. First, I want to echo my neighbor's comments. Steve's, I'm very much in support of everything he said, but I think I want to take the opportunity to echo and reinforce some of the points and perhaps add some others. Just in terms of some of the comments that were made about how fast people have reacted, December 2nd was really not that long ago. It was 10 days at a busy time of the year. And I don't know about others, I'm certainly just feeling a bit of fatigue from it, and the last thing I really want to do is come down here, as nice as you all are, and spend 3 hours away from work to do this. But it is important, and I wanted to share my comments. I think there's also a bit of history, and this, I think, maybe caught many off guard, because the last we had heard on the question of the ambassador's residence was last February, where he wrote a note to Mayor Watson indicating that he was planning on complying with the property on Lansdowne and building his embassy there and renovating that in the character in which it was built. So there's already some history where we've got a residence that has been left abandoned for a great many years. The last we heard, it was going to go ahead on Lansdowne, a street, based on what we're seeing here, far closer, I guess, in character. And yet that was rejected, and now we're looking at this on Birch. And if you compare the two streets, the size of the houses, the use of gates and fences would be far more consistent in a neighborhood like that. And that speaks to the point, I think, of the character of the neighborhood. Mr. Moffat referenced 4 buildings on the street. I live right across from that brown one on the corner, so I'm very familiar with all of them. The black ones virtually are invisible by their nature being black and well hidden behind trees. The brown one is all natural wood, and again, I find is not too big of so it blends in nicely. And the new one is bigger than I would have ideally liked, but again, is fairly typical of the character of, I guess, the large residential home that might be built. This case, the character is very much a completely different style. It's very much a Middle Eastern style. It's added a gate which is completely out of character with any of the houses in our neighborhood. And I'm not convinced that the traffic impact would necessarily be bigger from 5 houses, given that only 3 of those lots are on Birch, and the other 2, I think, are on Pond and McNabb, so it spreads it out. So I'm not sure. At best, it's a net neutral, but my primary concern, I think, is probably with just the character and how it fits in with our neighborhood. And I think, 5 normal residential houses would be far more fitting than this one, which really doesn't match the nature of the neighborhood. I'm also concerned with how Manor Park wasn't involved even in the development of these ideas. If one of my neighbors is going to do something out of the ordinary, seek a variance, they're likely going to come and talk to me before they even begin. They're going to say, how do you feel about this? And in fact, when my neighbors did get a variance, and that's exactly what they did. And so my concern is not just with the character, but it's also a little bit with the history and the lack of engagement that has occurred so far with what is potentially our new neighbor on the street, and somebody that we are going to be impacted. As Steve referenced, there will be patrol cars in the neighborhood. It'll be a very different feel. So I think that really speaks to the main areas, and I know, I'm not sure who was on your list, but I know some other neighbors have echoed their concerns to me when we met recently at a bit of a holiday gathering.
And as I said, we have, I'm not sure, I didn't count the number of submissions, but we have had a rapid fire of submissions in the last overnight, if you will, yesterday and this morning, maybe 10, 12. Yeah. So I thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Again, I want to tell you, I want to reiterate the fact that this committee can deal with the, we certainly live within certain timelines and that sort of thing, as does the Planning Committee, because it's under the Planning Act, et cetera. So we have those things under the Heritage Act we have with this committee. But some of the other things that you're bringing up are really not within our purview. And that's why I can tell you that no matter what is decided today, that I've already spoken with staff, and we are going to undertake to have that information, further information available prior to the Planning Committee. And we certainly will share it with anyone that is interested. So I know that very good notes have been taken here, as always. We'll go over all of those as well. You'll have those answers. Okay?
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for coming out. Okay, Leslie Maitland, please. Welcome, Ms. Maitland. Always nice to see you.
Thank you very much. I'll introduce myself to people attending. I'm the president of Heritage Ottawa, and I actually hadn't planned on making a presentation because I thought the design was fit in so well with the Heritage Conservation District that there wouldn't be any controversy. Our one reservation had been with respect to the landscape, and that is because the aspect of the Heritage Conservation District that is of paramount importance is the treatment of landscape. It is a park-like setting with significant setbacks and vegetation and a village atmosphere. Into this village atmosphere, Rockcliffe Park has managed to create a very eclectic group of buildings which reflect traditional Canadian designs, designs that are reflective of the national governments that have put in official residences here, and it is the landscape that has been the continuous thread that makes the village atmosphere survive. And our reservations, which we had expressed in our communication to you, have since been addressed by this revised drawing. I hope going forward that the fence remains at the height that has been discussed, 1.5 meters, and also that the fence remain a transparent metal fence and not be converted to a solid masonry fence. And that is our only significant reservation. When you get into the depths of reading the Heritage Conservation Guidelines, it actually says very little about the design of the individual houses. It doesn't need to. It allows for individual flexibility in the Heritage Conservation District, and it is, again, the landscape that is a unifying thread. And I would be very happy to talk to anyone who would like to learn more about Heritage Conservation Districts and Heritage Ottawa's input into these kinds of dialogues. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions of Ms. Maitland? Thank you for taking the time to speak and for sending in your comments earlier. Well, we can. I just want to say that, note to staff, of course we don't expect to have any surety from somebody on security as far as the details, but the fact is that it would be important to understand the pressures from transportation, from the extra traffic, et cetera, that would come about. We would never be in a position where we would ask an embassy to divulge their plans for their ambassador's home. But we know that the RCMP certainly would be involved in making sure that they were comfortable in what was undertaken. So that won't be for you, either of you, to look into. Either staff will.
Just one quick note, Madam Chair. This issue has come up before in projects I've dealt with in Rockcliffe Park regarding the height of fences and whether or not it's sufficient. And I did undertake at the time some conversations about that. Now, of course, I can't speak for every country. This was another country, but
it's probably not even good if you speak to that.
I just want to say, I'm not going to say the country. I'm just going to say that when I made these inquiries, the point was that that their fences are a deterrent. The security is inside the perimeter of the fence, and the fence is. No one ever thinks that that a fence this short can't be jumped.
Okay. Anyone have comments, further questions? Councillor Clark.
The recurring theme through most of these submissions is landscaping. The landscape plan is not with us today, but will it be here at Planning Committee?
I made a mistake. I did, because I think that question is a good one to ask of Mr. Julian Jacobs. Would you like to come forward? I think that there may be some questions of you. and I'm going to ask them to participate now.
Leslie's all willing to answer.
Well, that's fine, but
All I was saying is that the landscape plan is on the screen.
Yeah, I know, but there's no perspective of it, is what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Jacobs, have a seat. Did you want to make some comments on the landscape, first of all, please?
We were trying to preserve every tree possible. From three and a half sides, we have done that. The only time we need to break the facade of the trees, and I showed elevations which are not up here, of the other 4 streets, and they're all basically, it's a tree elevation. What you see is trees. And that's what we want. We want trees as deep and as continuous as possible. So that's rule number 1 for us. And as close as we can get and preserve our foundations. So we'll have some setback for foundations. What you see here in the kind of curvy line that goes around the property is a landscape architect drawing. And that curvy line that goes around the property is the wooded area that's being preserved. That line there, which goes around, and you see the depth of the trees. And the other trees are being added. Other trees are being, some have to be removed, but most of them can be clipped and be added to. And what he's done is, because there are almost no coniferous trees in the property, the landscape architect has introduced many, many coniferous trees you see in light gray, so that even in the wintertime, this time of year, the leaves will be off the deciduous trees, but the coniferous trees will be there, providing screening for like 4 months a year when it wouldn't be screened otherwise. So that's for the two-thirds or 3/4 of the property, which all you'll see is trees. On the front, where we had to put a driveway in and driveway out, we've replaced those trees with new coniferous and deciduous trees along the front, along the facade. You see along the property line, there's deciduous trees, and behind there are coniferous trees. You see this sort of thicker line, which hasn't been explained yet, just along the property line for that opening. Right there, there's a gray, that line there, and continues across the entire property, are either hedgerow or low planting enough to create some screening for the decorative fence, but also to soften it. And that could be either we've shown it on the inside side, but the fence will be so low, actually when I say 5 feet, that's 5 feet to the top of the decorative palm tree, if we decide to do that, but the majority of the fence is 4 feet high. And by the way, while I'm on the subject of the fence, you need to know that the fence is not the only thing we have. At the perimeter of the property, there are electronic motion sensors, which we actually don't need a fence, just to let you know. We don't need a physical fence. We're doing it because we need some way it'll help us in the whole security measures. But there are non-physical measures that we would have as well, which are invisible. So we also added trees between the ramp and the house. Those are new trees being added, a whole plethora of new trees, because they'll be removed to build coniferous and deciduous. So we hope that the effect at the end of the day will be and we did an elevation, which is not here today, but basically showing the elevation of the street with the trees, an actual elevation, which you'd see when you go by.
Can you provide that? You have it?
Actually, here are the other elevations.
Well, I think it's important that the public gets a chance to see it too. So what I'm going to ask is that we put those into a PDF of some kind, and we can share with the community, and Councillor Clark can see them as well.
Would you like to see them now?
You can. We can pass them around while we're talking.
There's 4 elevations of all 4 sides, including the neighbor's property.
And Councillor Clark has some other questions too, I think.
Yeah, no, when I said it wasn't, I guess my sense of it is that the building itself is not a concern to the heritage community. The concerns that are being raised about traffic, if you go all the way through all those residences, you very rarely see any cars coming out of them, except when they're having an event like a luncheon or an open house, which is with the number of embassies and ambassadors' residence in Rockcliffe, I would suspect that there's not more than 1 or 2 a year of those kind of events. So the theme about screening with trees I think would probably go a long way to making it unobtrusive as possible in the neighborhood, and also in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. The amount of tree cover is very important. So when I say I don't think it's with us, I don't know that this is so much a heritage issue as a planning issue. And it is going to planning committee?
Yes, on the 14th.
Of January. Okay.
And council on the 22nd.
Well, and then that timeline sort of puts the paid to the fact that we could delay it, because if we delay it, we lose the 90 days. That's unfortunate in a way, because we normally might have, if it weren't for the Christmas holiday, we might have even another couple of weeks. So I can sympathize with what seems to be extremely short notice, but also there's a holiday period in there that complicates this. But since the application is made, we have to respond. That's the rule book. And my only comment is that all of these comments about screening and tree cover should be taken into account, and hopefully something written up on them by the time it gets to planning committee.
Does anyone have, Vice Chair Podolsky, questions of Mr. Jacobs?
Mr. Jacobs, one of your architectural colleagues, posing the question of if this committee approves the staff report, which is to approve the submission, would you be willing to work with staff and the neighbors to come up with an enhanced landscape screening plan along Birch Avenue? I mean, right now you have 5 deciduous trees, a few coniferous trees on the edges, and then you have the fence with a hedge. Would you be prepared to work with staff, if we delegated that authority to staff, to increase the amount of screening so that the building is less visible during the wintertime as well as the summertime?
Yeah, I thought we'd done everything we possibly. We filled every square inch of space available with trees. But if the question is, can it then be more coniferous trees than deciduous trees, we would look at that possibility. Yeah, I'd be prepared to, if that's okay with staff here, I'd be prepared to meet with people and if necessary.
Yeah, because I think, Madam Chair, that
as long as everybody's being reasonable and
understands, allow between now and the planning committee review to meet with some of the concerns that people have about the soft landscaping along Birch Avenue, and I think that would probably satisfy me anyway.
Good, thank you. And I'm going to go to Councillor Hobbs, but what in square footage, what is the total build size? I think you said 1,600 square meters, did you say? 1,500 square meters? What is that, 4,500 square, like in square footage, because I'm old. I can visualize much easier in square feet.
I think the above grade,
Like it's under
grade?
5,000, isn't it?
Even below grade. What's the above grade? Because below grade you don't really see. It's a garage.
I don't care about that.
It's the above grade that we're interested in. 1,100
square feet,
It's about
including the pool?
12,500 feet.
Including the pool?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything above grade is 12,500.
Okay.
In three pavilions. In three building components, which are separated.
Yeah. Well, it's,
GFA.
no, it's just, I think it's just good
Footprint's
to put that in
Do
perspective
you want
as
the
well.
footprint, or do you want the total GFA, total area?
No, I was talking footprint,
Footprint is less. It's like 9,000 square feet, 8.5 to 9,000.
including the pool.
Yes,
How big is the pool in the building?
about 2,500, 2,000, something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hobbs?
Forgive me if I missed this, but when, are all the trees going to be gone from the property and then you will be replanting? Or
No, that curvy line that goes around the entire property,
Yeah.
that's the trees that are being maintained, the forest, the forest, the woods, if you will, that's the existing woods.
Okay.
In the existing woods, we're adding gray circles, which are the coniferous trees that are being added.
Right.
So that in wintertime, we still have we improve the situation, have more trees in the winter through those 4 months,
Yeah.
through those 4 dark months.
Okay.
We have,
And on the front along the Birch Avenue, how big will those trees be that you're planting in front of the building?
eventually they'll be 20, 25 feet high,
But when you plant them, what size will they
15,
be?
12 to 15 feet,
Okay, thank you.
plus the hedgerow on the bottom, which is 3 feet high, nominally 3 feet high.
And virtually every single communication that we have received has asked why it could not be repositioned so that the access would be off of Pond, for example, as opposed to Birch. And I'm wondering,
Well, the main reason is because we won't comply with the bylaws, with the setback bylaws.
okay,
And the other thing is the city has this very strong rule about slopes being no more than 8% of the
sorry about what?
ramps being very gentle in the city to residences. And this is unusual to have a ramp this gentle, but we've complied with that requirement, and because of that, it requires certain length. And that length is also available when you site the building that way. If you
Is
site
the
building-
ramp accessibility rules, is that
No,
what's
it's
driving it?
just the angle of the ramp.
No, but you were saying that the city has very
It's not
rigid
accessibility,
rules.
it's just they have it's a driveway
Yeah.
ramp. It can be no less than, it has to be a very gentle ramp, more gentle than almost any other city I've seen. Anyway, that's the rule, and we follow that rule. And what we're trying to do is have no committee adjustment of minor variance issues, and have no setback issues, height issues. We're well within the height by a lot. We're way below the height restriction that's allowed, and we're way within the envelopes of the setbacks.
So again, the reason that this is before us at all is not because there needs to be any exceptions or anything, but because it is located in the Heritage District.
I'll also say it's an ochre brick and soft stucco facade, and these are among the predominant materials of Rockcliffe Park, and even where I live in Toronto, predominant materials, Lawrence Park where I live, are brick and stucco. And this building is a brick and stucco building.
Well, I appreciate the comments that the response that you gave on the why could it not be the entrance be located on Pond, because there were many, I think the majority, if not all, of the comments included that aspect. And the fact is, you agree with what Mr. Jacobs said?
Yes, I do. Minor variances would be required. Also, in this way, I think the district is less impacted because this is the edge of the district, so you're facing out of the district and not into the district. So, and that's our concern, is to look at the impact on the district under the Heritage Act.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Jacobs? Thank you very much for coming out today.
You're welcome.
Does anyone on the committee have anything else to say, add? Okay, so on the recommendation, is it carried? Carried, thank you. So before you leave, gentlemen, if you'd like to look at those diagrams that we had, and as I said to the staff, I'd like to have them in PDF so we can share them with the community. Okay, well, thank you. Are there any notices of motion? No? Any inquiries? Okay, are we adjourned until Thursday? What? Other business? Oh, okay. Oh, yes, I forgot. How could I forget our other business? Mr. O'Connor. Well, see, it's not...
I'm sure it's forgettable.
Welcome, Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor is here today. He's our city solicitor and city clerk to give us a verbal update with regards to public members of this committee and the Provincial Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Thank you for coming today.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And this has been an issue with the public members since we first did some orientation with them when the committee got up and running. And more recently, I was able to secure an independent legal opinion on the matter that I thought I will table with the committee and share with the members. As you are all aware, the Built Heritage Subcommittee was created with expertise and public members in mind in order to provide and assist Council with advice on heritage matters. The Code of Conduct for members of Council is very inclusive because it specifically speaks to the application of the Code to include citizen members of both the Transit Commission and of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, and it goes on to point out that for conflict of interest matters, reference has to be made to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. In light of that, we have oriented the public members on all of those committees with regards to matters under the provincial legislation, which I know the members know very well, and they have been very diligent in making those declarations over the last 2 years. However, as a result of a number of variations on a theme, if I would describe them, Madam Chair, which put the public members in somewhat of a quandary over the last few months, I decided to go out and get an independent legal opinion to see exactly where they stood. I received that independent legal opinion on November 13th, and will table it, Madam Chair, with the coordinator and share with all the members. Essentially, it says at the end of the day that this is an advisory body to council, unlike a standing committee which has a certain amount of delegated authority, and therefore, as advisory members, the public members are not subject to the declaration requirements under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Now, before the members who are from council get excited, you continue to be subject to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, because Section 5 of that legislation says even if you're on an advisory committee, if you provide some sort of influence before, during, or after the matter rises to council, you're still subject. So I'll set you folks aside and talk just specifically about the public members. So in light of that, and obviously contrary to any court decision, because we don't have one yet on this matter, there is one with regards to a previous LACAC, Local Conservation Advisory Committee, which said this very thing, that under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, those public members are not subject. So, Madam Chair, if that is correct at the end of the day, and we certainly don't want to go through any litigation to find that out, one would think that perhaps then the members would be covered by the Advisory Committee Code of Conduct, which is very specific with regards to conflict of interest matters for our Advisory Committee members, and actually says that they can come to the City Clerk and Solicitor and seek my direction or advice on any confusing matters, and that they will be bound by that. However, of course, that isn't the way we established this committee originally. We thought that they were subject to the Act, and they have not been subject to the Advisory Committee's Code of Conduct. So we end up, Madam Chair, in a rather unique position of our committee members solely on this august panel, not on the Transit Commission. The Transit Commission does have delegated authority, so their public members remain subject to the Conflict of Interest Act. So it's just the very few members that are working with you that do not appear at this point to be subject to any conflict of interest regulations or rules. So in light of that unique situation, Madam Chair, I wanted to apprise the committee of it and seek your direction on two matters. Number one, that obviously we bring this back in term of council governance next fall to try to clarify further what the rules should be if this is the case. And number two, Madam Chair, that I, as they are no longer in a position, the public members are being subject to the municipal, the provincial legislation, that I work with them on any issues they may have over the next interim so that they don't require independent legal advice costing them money, and that we work through them with the continued diligence that I know they've already shown. They have declared conflicts on numerous occasions, but to make sure that there's no financial impediment to them having to go out and get that legal opinion. So those are the two directions, Madam Chair, I'm seeking from the subcommittee.
Well, that's excellent advice, and I'll tell you that it's a big woohoo from our perspective, because we have this committee that has been formed, the subcommittee, having 3 experts is absolutely important, and to lose the benefit of the conversation around this table with any of the 3 of them is not in the best interest of the subcommittee and the direction that we wanted to take when it was formed. And so I'm very happy to hear that. But the good thing is also that because our citizen members are so astute that they always err on the side of caution, and I'm glad that there's an opportunity now that they can go directly to you and have no financial impediment from having to get that information on your own.
Do they have to pay legal fees if they go to him?
No, but then again, we don't pay them for their services, which are greatly appreciated. Thank you. Thanks very much. Anyone have any questions at all from Mr. O'Connor? Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming out and doing that, the due diligence on that. So, yes.
Where would we, question, the Advisory Committee Code of Conduct, would that now be made available to us?
Mr. O'Connor?
I should have asked.
Did you hear the question?
The Advisory Committee Code of Conduct could be, I can certainly give you copies of it, but I was hoping, Madam Chair, to actually take the public members aside at a subsequent meeting where we could talk about some specific scenarios for them, and I'll share all that information with them.
Yeah, exactly. Less to read, just to hear. Okay, any other business? So are we adjourned until Thursday, January 16th?
Yes.
January 16th. Thanks very much.